Sara-Lena Maierhofer, welcome. You're currently holding a scholarship at Hochschule für Bildende Künstler in Braunschweig and visited recently Papua New Guinea and are now working on a project about artistic failure. You passed a formation as a photographer and studied photography and media at Fachhochschule Bielefeld, graduating in 2011. Today you will present your work, your project, Dear Clark. It was shown for the first time in the year of your graduation at Fotomuseum for Photography in Amsterdam and presented since in several solo exhibitions in Berlin, Kassel, Geneva and Stuttgart. In 2016, you received a grant by Stiftung Kunstfonds to produce and publish Dear Clark as an artist book. And so we can present it here today. And I think it was existing as an evolving and developing project, a work in progress for a long time, and now it's fixed as a book. And it was probably also presented in a lot of different situations, and so situation is also the keyword for our presentation here today, because we are very happy you followed our invitation here for a book presentation of Dear Clark at LISTE in Basel, where Fotomuseum Winterthur is invited as a special guest. And we are expanding here our new exhibition format, Situations, which exists since 2015 and aims to react more quickly to developments within photographic culture. Organized in 5 thematic clusters a year using tags as a mode of curatorial classification, the aim of Situations is to integrate the real and the virtual in relation to exhibition in a new way. Our current cluster theme, Fact, focuses on the relationship of photography and facts. And in times of fake news and alternative facts, which have been dominating the headlines recently, and a so-called post-truth age, in which the distinction between facts and fiction becomes more and more problematic, the construction of reality is in an insecure state. We have all been aware of this, I think, in the last months. And so we are very happy to have you here, and we are presenting you here in between a particular situation. We are having the talk in a performance environment of Emile Barré and his collective Music for Eggplant, who we have invited here to LISTE Basel as well. Presenting also artist books by David Fatih and Miriam Zili. So, very glad you're here, and we are curious about your play between fact and fiction around the figure of Clark Rockefeller. Maybe you can introduce us to your project and tell us how you first got to know Clark Rockefeller and his history, which is very particular, but maybe it's also like part of all of our lives, that we are all creating together the illusion of who we are by presenting who we are, and the others are believing who we are. And in this way, I'm happy and looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me, Fotomuseum Winterthur and LISTE Basel. Is that all right? Okay. I'm talking about a project I did in, I think, 2010 till 2012. It's called Dear Clark, Study of a Conman. And can we flip to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to move, sorry. So I discovered this newspaper article in Süddeutsche Zeitung in 2009, and I pinned it over my desk because I felt like a conman is such a perfect example of our world today. It's like Kim Kardashian is the metaphor for social media. The conman is a perfect metaphor for photography itself. So here we see the fantastic case of Clark Rockefeller, aka Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter. He was born in Germany, Bavaria, and when he was 17, he left the country without telling his family and he lived for 30 years in the US under, I think, 8 or 9 identities. I think in LA he pretended to be a Lord Mountbatten. Las Vegas he pretended to be a brain surgeon. He didn't practice. And what else? Stockbroker in Boston. And then, like, his masterpiece of identity theft was him pretending to be Clark Rockefeller. I think that worked for like 8 years. He got married during that time. She was a Yale, she was a really smart woman, but he was smarter. So, can we flip? So I thought, I'm gonna contact him, and I'm gonna go there, and I'm take a picture of him, and then I will understand what being a conman means. Because the question that was most interesting to me is, why does somebody do that? I mean, we all have the feeling of sometimes leaving our old self behind and being somebody new, somebody exciting. But he like went all through with it, not just a little bit, like a nice Facebook profile picture, but zack, a new identity. So he is in jail now in close to Boston. And I wrote him several letters, and that was the first one. I'm not sure. So it starts with, Dear Clark, I'm a German artist who has been following your case with quite some interest over the past 2 years. For the last couple of months, I worked on a project that deals with changing identities, and my work included research on your persona as well. And then I go on a little bit. As much as I can understand the absurdity of being a public figure and receiving letters from strangers, I would still appreciate to start a correspondence or to meet you in person. As Eric said before, my new project is about failure. This project started with a failure as well. He never responded to the letter. But I already had a grant for the project, so I had to go to the US. And that's him when he was 17, already looking like a Hollywood actor. So I went to the US and I visited all the places where he had lived. I met with friends, I met with the FBI, with a private detective, and I tried to follow his traces. So I went to Hollywood, climbed up the Hollywood hills, and when you look at the book is divided in chapters, and the first chapter is called The Promise, where I try to encipher the ever-enduring promise of the US, like you can be anything you want to be, vom Tellerwäscher zum Millionär. Like, why did he pick this country to perform his career as a conman? I walked the Rodeo Drive. I tried to find this glamour that lured him into the country. That's the cover of The Great Gatsby, and I thought it's a nice coincidence, The Great Gerhardsreiter. That's a quote from The Great Gatsby. I didn't want you to think I was just somebody. Because, I mean, there are so many conmen, so many fraudsters, Betrüger. There's so many. But I picked him because he wasn't in the game for like stealing money, or he was more in about the whole Ruhm oder Ehre, like this game of being somebody. And maybe you remember the story of Postel, this the mailman that pretended to be a, I think he was also a psycho. He worked in a clinic as a Gutachter for. So I called him up because I wanted to have him as an interview partner for a opening when I had a show in Dresden. He wanted 2,000 euros for like one evening, so I couldn't afford it. But one thing he said to me was, Frau Maierhofer, this feeling when you throw on your white coat and you walk down the hallway, and like left and right, the people are, Guten Morgen, Herr Doktor, Guten Morgen, Herr Doktor. This instant like lifting or gratification. So that's why I picked him. So the next chapter, I tried to figure out his most basic tool, the lie. So here we see a horse that pretends to be a unicorn, the man with a crown. And that's his actual birth certificate, which I made just a little bit more golden. Here my first stop was in San Francisco, and from there I went to Berkeley to to meet with a neuroscientist, and I asked him to wear Clark's mask, and then he showed me or I can show you now, where the center of the lie is. So one of his strategies when he left an old place and went to a new place with a new identity, he would first go to these rich clubs, like Rotary Club, Lions Club, and he would just pretend to be a poor lord from England or a Rockefeller, and they would greet him happily. And so he was a member in a Rotary Club in Pasadena, and I contacted them before. And they were quite shy about the whole thing, and they were, no, he wasn't really a member. And but when I was in LA, I read that they have a gala dinner happening on a Sunday, so I took the bus to, yeah, please, to Pasadena, and I just told them that I am. That my parents are Rotary Club members in Cologne, and that I'm a huge fan, and like they clapped hands when I had to stand up, and that's the main guy of the Rotary Club in Pasadena, and they have like the 4-way test of the things we say or do. First, is it the truth? And when you turn, and they even had another conman member. You don't see it, but his name is Robert D. Redford on his tag. This is a identity testing center where you can find out who you really are. And when I was looking for his house, I only had like he lived in New Hampshire for a while, and I took a rental car there, and I tried to find his house, and I didn't have his actual address, just a rough idea. So I rang the bells of all the possible neighbors, and one guy opened the door, and we talked, and then he said, "Oh, young lady, you don't have to add much to the story. His life is fictitious enough." So he actually met his wife at a costume party. I met her at a party. I didn't know it was a costume party. She borrowed me her head and became my wife. The next chapter is called Die Verwandlung, transformation. I worked with actors and models because what he does is he changes his posture, his habitus, his clothing, the way he talks, and here you see, I have to get up again, one of the most famous conmen of all times called the Chameleon. You can barely see him behind the plants. On the left you see the octopus mimicus. He changes his appearance according to the Fressfeind, like the enemy. And on the right you see possible toupee colors. This one is nice because I was wondering how he survived at the beginning before he had his rich wife. And I talked to a friend of his, and he said he was going to the horse races and betting, and that's how he made his income in the first years. And so I went a couple times to this horse track outside of New York, and I photographed these gentlemen, like these king for a day. You kind of think they live in a small room in Brooklyn, but like once a month or once a week they dress really nicely, and they make their hair super wavy. I'm jealous. And yeah. Then the next theory, how a conman can arise. comes from metaphysics, and it's called the multiple universe theory. And it basically says, super simplified, that whenever an action takes place, the universe splits in two. So there's this endless possibility of worlds. And I thought maybe a conman can do the same. And I applied it to humans. So like there's one person is still in Bavaria, and he split himself, and the other part went to the US. So here you see a person in the process of dividing. That's a very early photo montage. This document shows possible positions of Siamese twins in the uterus. And yeah, that is Michael Jackson. And here we come, if you go one more. We also talked about that before, Eric. Like in this chapter, it's called the multiplication. I forgot. That's embarrassing. But the basic thing behind is that, like, the idea of ourself is less. Like the outlines are less strict than we think. Our identity is way more fluid and movable. So we all have this multiplicity of selves in us.
We have to act it out all of the time. We have to act it out. Yeah.
We can, yeah.
We can. Okay.
Yeah, when I was browsing through the documents I found in the court, I had to laugh when I discovered this one, because it says, Herr Gerhardsreiter verfügt über eine gute Allgemeinbildung und ist vielseitig interessiert. That was his final diploma at Volksschule.
And how did you get into these archives, or where did you find it? I mean, even his birth document, and so...
The US is very easy with those things, yeah, because sein Prozess, his trial was in Boston, and when the trial was closed, you can basically look into all the material that the FBI did research, or that was very confusing.
So they finally had his real birth certificate.
Yeah. They got it from Bavaria.
In the file. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was also at the horse race. Oh, that's a nice one too. So that's a childhood drawing by Clark, and you can see that he saw himself already as a multiplicity of selves when he was quite small. That is a zebra horse. A horse fell in love with a zebra and jumped over the fence, and that is their love child. This chapter is called Die Häutung, the skinning, where I tried to picture the process that he went through over and over again, like a caterpillar or a butterfly or like a snake shedding his skin, leaving his old self behind. There was a good friend of him in Boston.
What did he say? I mean, he believed that he was Clark Rockefeller, and so how did he react to his history and his friendship with him? Are they still connected? Okay.
Yes, I met several of his friends, but I think he's the only one still in contact with him. Mm-hmm. He regularly visits him, and he's a very curious guy. I think he had some kind of respect to mm-hmm. this thing he built.
Okay.
Yeah, and very curious too. I think he sees Clark also a bit as a trophy, like mm-hmm. look at my famous friend.
Because not everybody survived meeting Clark Rockefeller.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's also a dangerous game that he played.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make a funny project about a murderer. So when I started the project and I was working on it, there were rumors that he might have killed 2 people, but it was a rumor, and I thought I don't take it in the project. So when it was done, I think they had another process, and yeah, they dig up another body, and then he never confessed, but it was pretty obvious that he killed those 2 people.
Okay, and he was guilty, and he's
Yeah.
in jail for this murder.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's a tough issue, actually, behind the story you made up.
Yeah, but I think I wouldn't have done the book if everything was already fixed. That's him when he got arrested, and I pictured him in a Muschel. What is it? Yeah, like the Venus from Milo, constant rebirth, and that was in front of his house in New Hampshire, and there were still all his belongings in those containers. And in one of those boxes, I found this kind of invisibility cloak, and I thought this is how he didn't get caught by the FBI for so long. The final chapter is all about it's called Die Spur, the trace, where I show my search, but also the research of the FBI, the private detective that his wife hired at some point, and yeah. These pictures I got from a friend of his, and when I interviewed her, she showed me these pictures and said, I was always wondering why he was hiding his face when we took pictures at birthday parties, or while he would make these weird faces. And that is the office of the private detective his wife hired. And he showed me these kind of maps, how you trace down people. And I made my own version of it.
When did his wife hire a private detective, and what was the reason?
They were together for, I think, 6 years, and then she hired the private detective because I think their marriage got, like they were living apart or something. They had a daughter, and I mean, she just tried to find out where, if his stories were real, because he had no money. Yeah, she became suspicious. And he had no passport, he was never traveling. He made up these weird Ausreden, like I can't travel, I get sick on a plane, or I like my home country so much. And then she hired this private detective, and he couldn't tell her who he was, but he could tell for sure that he wasn't a Rockefeller. So she got a divorce, and she got the full custody for the kid. But I think his daughter was his Achilles heel, because you change, and you change all the time, and you never really, I don't know if only one person really got to know him, and then there's this child who just loves you totally unconditionally for, like, not for the name or not for the clothes you wear, but because, so he kidnapped her under a supervised visit, and that's when the FBI got him.
Okay.
That was his mistake, his weakness, yeah.
So he also was in need of like a true and authentic love, or a person who really, loved his inner person who he was. Yeah.
I think it probably wasn't planned, but yeah, he got seduced by it.
Okay.
And yeah, that's again the private detective.
And did the police and the private detectives tell you about other cases they investigated with like a similar biography and camouflage person like Rockefeller was, or is he really an extraordinary and outstanding case?
I think it was a very long history of like a con man. And yeah, I mean, pretending you're a Rockefeller means you really have to do your research. He was like mingling with the high society in Chelsea and like all around the fancy streets in Central Park in New York. And a lot of those people actually like have a friend who is known to the Rockefellers, or they could like ask the right questions and find out who he was. But he spent a couple months researching the persona he wanted to be. And this Rockefeller actually existed. He went to the psychiatry when he was 19, and he pretended he was this guy, and this other guy never showed up again. Yeah. And here you see me standing in front of his prison in Boston. Because, I mean, I've sent him the letters, and but I felt that it's something different that I actually go there and I'm talking to his friends. And so I went to the prison and I made a sign saying, "Hi, Clark," on one side, and "Hello, Christian," on the other, because I didn't know what his like persona now was. And during my research, I contacted a lot of journalists who tried to contact him as well, like one guy from the New York Times, or but he never felt comfortable enough in his old self to talk about. I mean, he hasn't been Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter since he was 17. So when he was caught by the FBI, and all these masks were forcibly taken from his face, then he felt probably completely naked and not like Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter. So he never talked to the press, I think only once for a TV interview.
Did it play a role, or was he ever asked, or was there an investigation about his mental health state, or was it more like he really it was a betrayal, and he was a con man, and because it's also like an obsessive observation of this person, Clark Rockefeller, who disappeared in the hospital and couldn't get out anymore, and then he played this role. Was this all like calcul, or or does he have mental health issues as well? And how was your investigation in this whole project? Because I think if you go really deeply inside a story like this, you can also become involved in a way that you question your own behavior and
my own sanity.
Maybe not your own sanity, but you become aware of how we are all creating our identities in all-day life in a lot of different situations and processes. And so how did it change your awareness of yourself and your...
I mean, I think at first it was jealousy because I'm very bad at lying. But there was also this huge fascination for him because I think I have a thing for people who just make the world as they want it to be. Later I did a project about Silvio Berlusconi, which is a little bit of a similar issue. Because I don't think that everything is fixed, and I like to have this option of possibilities in something. And I mean, they are totally größenwahnsinnig. Yeah, But of course, it was an issue for during the trial, because I have it here. According to the forensic psychologist consulted by the defense during the trial, Christian suffers from narcissistic personality disorder and delusional disorder, grandiose type. So not just any, but grandiose type.
Okay.
But it was intentional. Like, he didn't get lost in the illusion of being somebody else. It was very much planned and calculated. And yeah, here you see the cover of the court data. And I kept it because it says Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, aka Clark Rockefeller. So even the officials didn't really know where to put him. Yeah, that is the final image of the book. It's kind of it's almost like an epilogue, because I've spent, I think, 1.5 years on this project with the intention to get to know him, get to know his motives. And when I came back to Germany, I didn't felt I have moved 1 inch closer to him. Like, his outlines are still blurry, and I can't touch him.
And what is a very cool feature of the book, and what I liked a lot, is that you have got different surfaces of images sometimes. And for example, we saw the horse pretending to be a unicorn. And yeah, the materiality of the photography also played a role in your history and how you develop this narrative of your Dear Clark project. So maybe you can tell us something about your choices of materiality and collage techniques in the book.
I think one after, I have an installation shot. So here you see one part of the show at Foam, and I tried to keep the material sources apart. So you had documents just behind some glass, and then you had the portraits framed, and then you had the more documentary images on a box. And I mean, I have a this disorder, multiple
personality disorder.
Because my professor told me, you can't put everything together like black and white. And I studied documentary photography in Bielefeld. And that's not, I mean, you have to find your style. You have to find your, but I could never decide which way I want to go. And I just put it all together. But I tried to keep the feeling of the material. So I had these copies still being copies. And under the unicorn you see the toast. That is also very nice. It's a toast, a conman toast, who pretends to be toasted, but he's only painted. And in the show, there's the actual toast bread in an object frame. And in the book, I wanted to have this layering effect, like you discover things by opening it, by unfolding it, by like digging deeper in the
Yeah, it's like unfolding a personality of a real character or person. Yeah, and it's like in the installation as well, when you've got different layers and you go through it, like you go through the book page by page, and then you can discover a different layer each time. And when there is what I think is probably really interesting in the installation, when you've got the documentary files all together, and then you've got the more associative associated materials, then maybe this is one of the big powers of your work, or that the character develops and evolves in the aesthetics or in the a perception of the viewers, because you never name it like it's like this and this and this, but you always circle around it, around Clyde Rockefeller, and the circles become bigger and bigger, or closer and closer, and this is a very nice way to investigate a case like this, I think.
But I think I needed, at one point of the work, another student said, Sara-Lena, you should, just invent a conman yourself, make it even more crazy, more fictitious, and but I said I couldn't do that. I needed this kind of gravity thing to go back to, like this point in reality, in time and space, where a place I could go. And of course, when I met with this FBI agent, he said that a conman is a perfect mirror for your desires. So he has a different strategy for every person that sits across from him. Some people want to have like a VIP status in a club, or some people want to have money, and he promised that. And with photography, it's a bit the same. Like it's this mirror that reflects our desire for truth, for example, or that's why I kept the documentary images in it, to have the spectrum.
We can open up for questions from the audience, if there are some. Feel free.
Do you know who's reading your book?
Reading?
Reading or receiving your book? Are these artists or people from conspiracy theory?
No, I don't have this kind of specialized audience. There probably are a couple of conman fans, collectors among them. I myself had a conman club for 2 months, but then the other member decided not to be part of it anymore, so that I didn't want to have a club on my own. And I think basically a lot of students saw the work somewhere and like the way how I use material, and I play with photography. But yeah, I don't stand behind the book stands and shake every person's hand. I just think nice people buy it.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
It was a big pleasure because it could also be like an audio book. It's a pleasure to listen to you telling the story. Maybe one interesting question might also be, I read that you did a lecture performance at the Rockefeller Center. Is that correct? And,
yeah, but it's a fake Rockefeller Center.
It's a fake Rockefeller Center as well. Okay. Because I was reading it and I thought, wow, what did they say, and how did this invitation happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
okay.
The work I did right after was exactly about this kind of distance, because I felt I had crossed some kind of invisible border with the work. Like, who gives me the right to talk about, to create this universe about somebody I don't even know? And there's the show is actually on at Kunstverein in Friedrichshafen, and on Sunday there's the artist talk with a biologist, where we talk about flight distance, what is too close, what is too far, and yeah.
Did you send a book to Clark Rockefeller himself? Okay, but you didn't get an answer. Okay.
No, I know from his friend that he got it, but I think he has actually a lot of fans. I'm just one among them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we all became fans of Clark Rockefeller today and of your book. And you can also buy Dear Clark here at our booth. Thank you, Sara-Lena Maierhofer.
Thank you, Eric.
My pleasure.